This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Henrik Sjoman. It's a hard thing to say. I'm working at the Swedish University of Horticulture, so I will show you some pictures from that. But I just want to say that I'm not a native English speaker, so bear in mind that sometimes I get quiet, and then I go through a crisis in my head to find the right words. And if I say penis, I mean pinus, and we talk about pine trees, nothing else. So I pronounce probably things a little bit different. So I just want to make sure everybody on the same page, okay? So just some introduction, Sweden. I've been here for some times in the US, and Sweden and Switzerland is something you have some problem with. Sweden, where is it? Switzerland, you see? Okay, that's a different, all right? So Sweden, this is where I come from. It's a big country, one of the biggest country in Europe. This map is probably drawn by a Swedish because it's actually bigger than it is actually. But the thing is, we have a big country from north to south to north, which means we have a lot of different kind of climates in the country. But still, we have a really good climate, by the way, even if we are a very northern country, because we have the Gulf Stream just go by here and makes our climates better than we actually should have. So we have a very mild climate, and it's actually very similar to New England when it comes to the climate. This New York, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont, that kind of climate we actually have up there. But we are much, much northern than in New England. This is, I stole pictures and part here. This is how it looks in the south. In the southern Sweden, very agriculture. This is in the north, a lot of mountains. And this is something in between where I come from. A lot of forest. This is actually a picture in the midnight. We have, this is a thing I missed here, is the nights. You have dark nights in the summer, we have very light nights. For 2 months we doesn't have any dark nights, we just have 24 hours daylight in Sweden, which I prefer, and this is how it looks in here. So this is just an introduction to Sweden, then you should go there, it's a beautiful country. The campus, this is the campus I come from. The Swedish University of Agriculture Science is a campus, or is a university that are spread all over the country. We are in the north, in Umeå, where the university focuses on forestry and fishing. We are up also in Uppsala, where it's more agriculture and animal type of direction. And in the south, where I live, or where I work, it's more horticulture, landscape planning, that kind of direction. So this is our campus, which is in a very urban area, and the campus is like a green island. We have Malmö in the back, this is Lomma and Lund, and you can see how flat it is, very strong agriculture. And the campus is very old. So this is the Arboretum, which is the biggest tree collection, or the collection of woody species in Northern Europe, and have trees that are over 350, almost 400 years old. So it's a very big and old place. And this is a castle in the middle of the park, and this is where I have my office. So why I'm showing this is actually, I would like to invite you researcher, because we have something that we are very proud of. We have something called the Landscape Laboratory, a thing that we are very unique in. We allowed us to, if we come up with an idea, try to design a woodland, for example, a Chinese or American, or just a nice design woodlands. We allow us to build it in scale 1:1 to see how it works over time. So in our campus we have a landscape laboratory that is today 60 hectare large and increasing every year with new plantation, where we're building things just to see how it works in a full scale. And the good thing with landscape laboratory that we don't have any end date of the research. We can plant things and just following for 10, 15, 50, 100 years, it doesn't matter. And so the lack of the landscape laboratory today is that we would like to have more international researcher in the research group dealing with the landscape laboratory. And you can see it some of the here. We're also working with wetlands, stormwater management, but also the research field here belongs to the landscape laboratory. So it's like the bluegrass lane, but much, much bigger and much cooler, I think. Sorry, Nina. Sorry, Pat. All right. That was just an introduction, but I will do another introduction because the research I'm doing together with Nina and company is where it's most towards urban plants and special urban trees, and special towards selection of new species into urban environments. And in order to understand that, I would like to do just a short introduction of how and why we're doing this. Because international, this is the problem, not only in Sweden or Scandinavia, but also here in the US, but all over the world. There is a lack of diversity when it comes to urban trees. This is a study we finished a couple of years back where we evaluated the Scandinavian region when it comes to the diversity of urban trees. And it's pretty scary numbers. If you have problems, I just talked with Nina about her inventory this weekend, and she had Norway maple, Norway maple, Norway maple. But when it comes to Sweden, it's lime, 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 and lime, or the Scandinavian region. But this is pretty scary when you see that almost 45% of all street trees in Helsinki, the capital of Finland, it's just one species of lime. Linden, okay, linden, lime, we say, yeah, linden then. Sorry. But that's just the street trees. Helsinki haven't inventory other trees. But if you come to Oslo, the capital of Norway, they have in their tree database, which we use in order to do this kind of evaluation, they also including public trees that are in park environments. But still, you can see, even if you have street and park environments, just 3 species and stands for half of the whole tree population. And this, of course, is not, we talk about sustainability and longevity and how sustainable our urban environment is. And this is not sustainable when you rely on very few species in order to deliver in not only the beautification of urban areas, but also as trees start to be more and more important in order to deliver different kind of ecosystem services. For example, stormwater management, urban heat island mitigation. In Sweden, it's a big thing. We use trees in order to have wind shelter in order to reduce cooling down buildings, which increase the cost of heating up the buildings and so on. So trees starting to be very, very important stuff in an urban environment. And if you just rely on few species, that's very risky things. In the same study, we also evaluate to see, are there any differences between different kind of urban habitats, for example, street environment or park environment. And this is, of course, it's not rocket science. It's pretty common sense that it's easier to find a great catalog of species that grows well in park environment because the park environment have better growing condition compared to a street environment. So if you find a few species that grow in street environment well or perform rather well, you just go for them over and over again. So much of my research, and together with Nina, is towards street environments. Here can you see there is less diversity compared to park environment, and this is just an example from Oslo. So much of the research we do with Nina is towards street environment, because in hard surface landscape, so to say, is the need of a great catalog of great performing trees very, very important to find. Because in the paved environment, the need of trees is more important compared to street environment, because the few trees that are allowed in the paved environment needs to deliver much, much more compared to trees just in park environment, because that's easier, for example, stormwater management and so on. So much of the research is towards street environments. But I will continue, because if you just focus on few tree species, this is what can happen. This is a nice picture of a less nice thing. This is the Asian longhorn beetle, which is one of many threats to trees in urban environments. We just finished a study which was published earlier this year of the host range of trees that this bug or Asian longhorn bugs can attack. And this is the result for the Asian longhorn beetle, 137 species in general. This is another bug, citrus longhorn beetle is even worse. This is the one we have in Europe, actually naturalized in Italy, moving north. And this is the big problem. So you see this math. Few species, many diseases and insect attacks. It's not a good calculation. So what we need is, of course, increase the catalog species, increase and also start to using rare and untraditional species that don't get affected of, for example, this one. But the problem is, and this is another problem for us in a Scandinavian country, we are poor, we're extremely poor. We live actually in one of the poorest regions of the world when it comes to native tree species. Here in New York State, you have disgusting rich when it comes to native tree species. It's provocative to go out in the forest here just to name drop all the trees. I'll just give you an example how poor we are. This is the wooded horses. It's like the national symbol in Sweden. I'm very sad that the story behind it is just very ridiculous. I don't tell you. But this is a native horse. It's a wooden one. But each horse here, it represents one species, or represents the species that we have. We have 34 native tree species in Sweden. 34. So if you add diseases or insect attack that attacking them now or will in a short future attack the trees, we end up with this one. But if you also add urban paved sites to see which of these species, this one, that can grow in this kind of habitats, which are really challenging for trees, we end up with 4 tree species. So the thing for us Scandinavian people, we can't rely on native only. So we get really provocative when we hear people native only, because we can't deliver that in Sweden. I just want to make you sure. So this is the result. Pretty pissed off. We get frustrated how to do this. So the challenge we are doing, or stand in front of in Sweden anyway, is we have a lack of diversity. We have many diseases and also insect attack that attacking our trees, and we have very few native tree species. So what we need is actually work with more exotic tree species that originate from other parts of the world but still grows in a climate that are comparable to Sweden, that grows well in Sweden. But at the same time, it's important to find guidance, because you can't be angry on landscape architects or tree planners when they continue to use traditional plant materials. Because think about it, if you're a tree planner working on a very prestigious project in the center of New York City, you don't start to use a very rare or a plant material you never used before. You don't do that. Because if you do it, you'll be very famous for the guy that planted trees that died half a year later. You want to work with safe materials. So as a researcher, I see it's our job to try to convince tree planners to find evidence of this rare and untraditional tree species, to find guidance for tree planners in order to start to use them. Because we can't force them, we have to find some kind of ground for them. So what we have done the last 10 years is this, to traveling around the world, to actually studying habitats, natural habitats, which have clear similarities to urban habitats in Sweden. So this is just a few examples. This is from Caucasus. This is actually for Chechnya, a place where I not recommend to go on a vacation, but they have fantastic flora there, and also climate which are more or less identical to inner city environment, for example in Copenhagen or in Stockholm. But also Carpathian Mountain in Romania. I just showed this picture to Nina before. You can see the bulb flowering. Do you see that? It's Colchicum autumnale, also a late flowering bulb, one of the most poisonous plants we know. So it's pretty impressive that this horse is still alive. And also US, of course, both west and eastern US is areas we studying a lot. So this is some of the parts of the world we have been traveling around in order to studying habitats and see which other trees can we use, but also try to find evidence or guidings of how they could be a good urban tree for us and start to replace the one we're using too much today or will get affected in a short future. So you can see that the research is really fun. There's a lot of traveling, but also a lot of walking in mountains. So what we start with in the work is start to do this kind of calculation. So we do different kind of calculation to see which kind of areas of the world have similarities to our, not only our climate, but also trying to see which kind of growing habitats can we calculate to see similarities. For example, this is from northeast Romania and the Republic of Moldavia, where we're trying to find just areas which have similarities to paved environments in Copenhagen. For example, in a calculation we try to add all the information or all the factors that influence trees in paved environment and try to see where in other parts of the world can we find more or less exactly the same growing condition. And then we go there and try to understand it even more, which kind of species grows there and so on. I will explain a little further. So we start to just make an example of one of these case studies. This is from the Qingling Mountain in China, where I've been several times, and my first year as a PhD student, I went here for a whole year, lived here. And actually I met a person from Cornell here, Vinay, in this department. So he's the one actually introduced me to Nina, and thanks to him I'm here today probably. But the Qingling Mountain is an interesting area for us in a way, because recent collection from China is from this area, the Sichuan and Yunnan area, and also the eastern of Tibet, which is probably the most species-rich region of the world, where you can find a fantastic richness of species. But the problem here in this area, the thing is not hard enough for us in Scandinavia. So many Scandinavians went up here to the Manchuria area, to the border to North Korea and Mongolia, Russia and northeast China. But the problem up here, the plants are too hardy. They're too continental, starts too early in the spring, grow too long in the autumn, and are not good. Actually, they are better in the northern Sweden than in the southern Sweden, because they are too continental, as I said. So the area we are testing, well, of course we're traveling around in China to collect and see which area actually could be the best one. And we ended up in between, in the Qingling Mountain, China. If you like panda bears, this is the place to go. And I will explain how panda bears are one of the most hated animals for us to collect plants. But I will explain it later on. And it includes a lot of alcohol. But this area is actually, it's not 2 miles from this. And the mountain is high enough, almost 4,000 above sea level, meter above sea level. So still you can find some of the elevation is more or less comparable to inner city environment of the Scandinavian area. So of course calculation to calculate how good they are, and then we go out in the field to work. And if you believe field work is a glamorous work, you're pretty wrong. This is how it looks. This is in a farmer's house. I'm spooning with, this is my driver, Mr. Ma, and this is the students, Li Yuan. And Li Yuan followed two times, and then he said, I'm never going to follow you again, because it was a little bit too high mountains we're walking. So me and Mr. Ma were together for a whole year, so I know him very well, very close. And this is the dinner every night, noodles and beers, and this is the candles. And the most important thing is to drink beer so you sleep before Mr. Ma, because when Mr. Ma starts to snore, it's impossible to sleep. But Mr. Ma is a very nice guy, because when he drives over this kind of bridges, he asked me to step out and see, and then he drive over first a couple of times, and then he come and get me, and then we drive over. So he's a nice guy. So this is how it is, and this was actually for a whole year, Mr. Ma and me working in the Qingling Mountain, because the problem working in China is that there is no good literature, not even for Chinese, to read about the flora system, how the different kind of plants grows in different kind of habitat, different kind of elevations on. So the first 2 or 3 months was just for me and Mr. Ma traveling around, climbing up and down, walking up and down in order to start to learn how the flora system are together and how different species grow in different kind of habitats and so on, which is a great job, but it's also frustrating when you have a PhD coming that you have to publish papers and all things. But it's good fun. But this is how it works. In order to find, we find an elevation, in this case 1500 to 2000 meters above sea level. This is the place where the climates are more or less exactly the same as inner city environment of Scandinavia. But in order to find the right habitats and the right growing condition, the microclimate, we have to find it. And that's found up here on the warm south-facing slope, which looks like this. So that's why this is not the most nice place to go, because you have to tie yourself to a tree, otherwise you just drop down here. So that's why the students stop to work after just 2 times. But the thing is, this is how it works. And here you can find habitats that more or less have strong similarities to paved sites, for example, when it gets warm and very dry, especially after when the snow melts or when after a rain, it dries up very quickly, which is what it is in paved environments. And this is the field work. Of course, in the morning, 2 hours, climb up here, do the work, inventory the tree, take soil sample, drill the tree, measuring the trees. All together gives you good information of which species grow on these sites and what's the sites represent, but also you can see which trees grows quick and which trees grows very slow on these sites. And that makes you good information how to collect next one, how to collect the species that you should, because you're more interested in the trees that can tolerate this growing condition, but at the same time grow quickly fast and delivering in a rather short time scale anyway. Because earlier collection is just out, collect seed, take it home and start to grow. And it takes 2-3 generations of gardeners before you start to learn about the plants. But by doing this, you can do a first screening in the field to don't collect of the trees that don't have the future as urban tree and focus on the one that have the great potential. So this is the work we have done here in China. And this is just an example of things that we do in field in order to communicate with tree planners and also researchers of the findings we do in field. Here we have a slope. It's a very sharp slope. This top of the ridge here is just 1 meter, so you go on balance when you're walking here. But here you have a north-facing slope. Here's a south-facing slope. So the distance from here to here is just 20 meters. That's it. But the species combination between these slopes are completely different. On the south slope, we have plants that have the strategy to handle warm and sometimes really, really dry condition. So here you find almost just oaks. Wintergreen oaks, but also broadleaf oaks, and also 2 and 1 needle pines. But on the south-facing slope instead, here it's just more moist because after a rain it dries up much slower. And it's not that warm, so the evapotranspiration is less compared to the south-facing slope. So the plants here, they are very much needed to have moist and cool condition, but on the other hand, they are more shade tolerant because they have to compete. So the restriction is not below ground, restriction are above ground. So these trees are park trees that are very successful in moist, rich habitats and also really good to compete in this kind of environment. On this side, restriction are not the sunlight, because there's a lot of sunlight, you can see the tree crown, get a lot of sunlight through, but the restriction is below ground. And that's how it is in urban condition. For example, in urban paved environment, restriction are below ground, not above ground.
Isn't running water an issue here?
Sorry?
So in this condition, it seems like the water is always running through the slopes, because it's the trees are on the sides of a mountain, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have stagnant water in this condition.
No.
But in urban conditions, the trees are usually irrigated and the water is usually stagnant, I would imagine.
That's the design of planting pit. You should never ever allow to have standing water in the planting pits. Then you have done a wrong design of your planting pits. That's bad. So you should have well drained always, also in the planting pit as well. So drainage is a key thing in urban plantation anyway. So if it's watered down, something wrong. That's not good. So this is just an example that you can see the difference between different habitats, but also when you go out in the field, you can see the use potential of the trees when you are in natural habitats. And this is just some of the findings. China is is extremely rich in species. Many species have never ever been grown in or outside China. For example, this Ulmus glaucescens, it called Yunnan elm, never been outside China, and now it's in cultivation in Alnarp, but also we have shared to the Kew Garden in the UK, just to be sure that if our dies, we still have some in the queue and so on. This is a small leaf elm. You can see the bark looks like the Selkova, and it grows really, really well and fast on this extremely dry habitats, and doesn't have any problem with the Dutch elm disease. So suddenly, this is a good urban tree, special for paid environments. But also you can find trees that we know for a very exclusive park arboretum, but they have never go outside this arboretum or botanical garden because we don't know enough about them. But this habitat studies gives more information about them. For example, Exocorda giraldi, or this is Staphylia holocarpa. I won't say an English name because I have no idea what's the English name of them. But these are available in arboretum, but through this habitat study, we can start to know more about it and start to use them maybe in more public plantation and so on. So this kind of research is not only to collect new things, it's equally important to find more information of things that we have around us, but we don't dare to use because we don't know enough about them. Just a more example of this Peonia fruticosa. This is the growing habitat where it grows, more rocky places. This is just two examples of Corylus tree-growing hazels. This Corylus fargesii with this peeling orange bark, and this is Corylus chinensis, which have a bark that looks similar to shagbark hickory. It's two beautiful trees that have never been in a more horticulture perspective, but they have the potential to become very, very good horticulture trees.
Are they edible nuts?
Sorry?
Are the nuts edible?
Yeah. And the Corylus chinensis have very close relationship with Corylus colurna, which is more common in cultivation. Actually, hybridize together when they meet each other in the Central Asia somewhere. So the one which are Corylus chinensis in cultivation together today is this hybrid. So the true Corylus chinensis is not available in cultivation today because they don't have this bark, this beautiful bark. And also some early flowering trees, and also some late flowering trees. For example, Coriteria paniculata, the Chinese tree that grows more or less on bare rock. One of the most drought-tolerant trees, and the research me and Nina are doing here at Cornell, which I'll hopefully show you later on, also show that it's so drought-tolerant, and it's this perfect tree for the urban environment, special. I just took this picture because it's a big leaf. The guy is 180 tall, you know. Not really. Another case study, Romania and Moldavia. I just want to go through it. Same thing, calculation about the habitats, and why Romania and the Eastern Europe is one of the most interesting area of the world when it comes to climate smart trees for urban environment is that we already have a climate east of Carpathian Mountains. This is Europe, Sweden, Switzerland. We have the Alps. We have the Carpathian starts up here and goes like this down. This is Transylvania, where the Dracula lives. So you know that? But east of the mountains here, the west winds, the moist winds from the Atlantic, from the Gulf Stream, more or less ends here in Transylvania. So on the west part of the Transylvania, it's very wet, very moist, very rich, big trees, big forest. But in the east, not much rain comes over the Carpathian. So we have more or less, as I said, on the east side of Rocky Mountains, we have it here. Very dry, cold winters, cold and dry winters, warm and dry summers. So this area, east of the Carpathian here, but also down here in the Caucasus region, have more or less exactly the climate and growing condition as we find in the city environment when we add urban heat island effect and so on. So that's why we have been a lot in the Eastern Europe to try to investigate trees. But the landscape is not that sexy. This is not the place you go when you visit Europe the first time. It's better places. But this is how it looks, these great, huge steppes. And the steppes are most famous for their meadows. This is the meadows. This is a Ukraine zebra. Just kidding. This is from a zoo in southern Ukraine. Actually, now it's occupied by Russia, where you can find some of the most interesting meadows of the steppe. I just go through here. You can see how beautiful the steppe is when it's flowering. This is from Romania. So if you like perennial plants that could be used for in roundabouts or in roof gardening and so on, this is the area to go, because they are more or less growing in that kind of habitats. But in this steppe environment, you also find patches of forest. This very famous steppe forest of Eastern Europe, which includes many species. And this is how it looks when you do fieldworks. I don't have Mr. Ma with me, and here I'm alone. So this is the dinner in the field. It's canned ham. And when these cans of ham moves to Sweden, they just change the label from canned ham to cat food. Because it smells and tastes probably the same, because that's the dinner when you eat canned ham in the Romanian way. And I have a tip for you. If you're camping here, don't throw apples you haven't eaten outside the tent, because then the wild boar comes. And the wild boar here look like the orcs in the Lord of the Rings. And you don't want to have a couple of wild boars fighting for your apples in the middle of night. I had that a couple of times, and that's scary. It's very hard to sleep after that kind of event. But that's how it is. So, it's not that glamorous to do this kind of research. But the thing is, what you find here, it's some of the most interesting trees for urban environments. For example, Sorbus terminalis, that's the one growing here with these beautiful autumn colors. And the oaks here are the Quercus frainetto, the Hungarian oak, which is one of the most drought tolerant, but also one of the most beautiful oaks for urban environments. But also silver linden, is that right? Yeah, Tilia tomentosa, which also is one of the most drought tolerant among the linden trees anyway. So you can see here, some of the species are in cultivation. We have them, but we don't use them. So what we believe is through this habitat study, we can find more evidence to convince both nursery to start to produce them in higher numbers and bigger trees, but also convince landscape architects and planners to start to use them. So it's not only to just grab new trees, but also convince people to start to use them. But one thing when it comes to plant hunting and trying to find good things is that you don't have to find new species. You can equally find better types of already introduced species. So the plant hunting's days are far from over when it comes to finding really, really good horticulture plants. I will give you a couple of examples here. This is a solution of a 100 years old mystery. I will tell you about, Wilson, Ernest Wilson, rather famous plant hunter. He was actually hired in Arnold Arboretum in Boston for many, many years. But the first time he was in China he was collecting the Diva tree. But the same trip, he wrote in his diary that today I saw some beautiful flowering magnolias. One was red flowering and one was white. I must come back in autumn to collect them. And he did. He went back in autumn, collect the seeds from that. But when he sent it home to Veitch Nursery, because they was paying for the trip there, he accidentally mixed both the seed in the same box and sent it home. And the nursery took them and started to propagate them, and they grow fine. And after 5 or 6 years, this nursery have a sellout, because the man of the nursery said, I'm fed up with it, I'm going to sell this nursery. So at that time, there was 6 plants from this Magnolia collection. And that was selling to different parts of England. One at Kew Garden, one at Bodnant Garden, and one at Carhays Castle in Cornwall. And then they started flowering. So the one at Bodnant and Kew Garden looked like this. Big, beautiful flowers, white with this purple base. And get the name Magnolia sprengeri. But the one at Carhays Castle, it have red pinkish, really dark pinkish flower. And the unique with this thing is that it have a similar strong color, both on the outside of the tepals as inside of the tepal. That's very rare, because when a magnolia is flowering, they have strong colors on the outside. But when they open up, they have less color and lose much of the color when they start flowering. So this dark-colored Magnolia sprengeri kept the colors even when it's flowering out. So it gives much, much more color. And it gave the name Diva, the best name for this plant. And people that get very excited over this Diva and have used it a lot, the different kind of crossings. But when you read Wilson's diary, he said a whole valley of this Diva, this dark coloring magnolias. So for 100 years, plant hunters and stupid people like us have been traveling to this area to try to find this valley, but haven't been successful. So instead, people said, oh, just a myth, just a mutation, something wrong, no. But we thought, since I'm going to spend a whole year in China, why doesn't we do a test to find this valley? Anyway, we can find some good moments. But the problem is, this area is very rich in pandas, this cute little bit bear. And the problem with this bear is that if it shows up in a forest, the government throw out the people in the forest and protect a huge piece of forest for this panda. And it's impossible for Western people to come in this forest to studying, because there is this damn panda. So if you go to Beijing to try to find some paper to get into this area, no chance. Instead, you have to go to the area and drink yourself into the area. So what you do is try to go to the province city and find the boss there and try to drink you up in a hierarchy. And this is after about 8 days of constant eating and drinking. And this is the forestry, the highest boss in the forestry in this area. And this is the man from the Communist Party. So these guys we was drinking with for about 2 days. And it's not like one drink. This is the morning drink. It's about 11 in the morning. We have an early lunch, and this is how it looks later in the evening. This is my friend Alan. We try to drink even not every night. We try to split the night between us. And I think this night was Alan's night. So anyway, after 7 or 8 days hard drinking, this is actually how you go in Caucasus as well. So it's not only China. But after some hard drinking, we get the access into this area. And we start to interview people. Have you seen this magnolia? Have you heard of it? And after some couple of days driving, we found this man. We find actually a tree with this. But as you see, it at his home. So we actually found the one we were looking for, the one would have a strong color side on the inside of the tepal, the same as the outside of the tepal. But still, we would like to find the wild population of this species or this type of magnolia. So we continue to driving. We had a small bus, and we find a farmer that said, yeah, I know a guy that probably knows more. And he and his family went into the van. We went to his place, and he said, yeah, but I know another guy that knows a guy. So after a while, we have like 20 people in a bus, crowded, driving, and this is the place we ended up. We finally found a guy that, yeah, I know a place, go out the mountains, take left, take right, go up there, take left, and this is the road. So actually we park the car down here and walk up, and when we go over a ridge, we start to see these ones. Several of pink clouds in the valleys. And when we get closer, we saw these ones. Even better than the Diva is collection in the collection today. So this is just an example. There is more stuff out there. So we actually are reintroducing this Diva that was collected 100 years ago from Wilson, and now we have collecting at least 40 new genotypes of these plants. And hopefully we get more genes into the cultivation, which we can use for hybridization and so on. But also we have found these dark pink flowering magnolias in habitats which is much colder than the one that grew before. So it must be possible to find some good looking hardy Divas in the future. So just another example, Magnolia biondi, a really boring magnolia, 3 centimeters large, white with a little purple base, and it's more taxonomic interesting. But we thought it was interesting because Magnolia biondia is one of the more hardiest magnolias. We thought we can use it as a good parent in order to find some hardy stuff. And I was young then, all right? I don't like this picture, but focus on this one, okay? This is a big head. Anyway, after a while when we start to try to find some Magnolia biondia, we start to see the variation within the species. And really quick we realized that the most boring type of the species is the one available in cultivation today. And the more interesting types are still out there. And this is just an example of the variation of the species Magnolia biondia. So we go from this rather big 7 to 8 centimeter large flowering magnolias to which have more like the tulip shape of the flower to these bigger ones. This is actually a collective behind a house where they throw all the rubbish there. So actually the working name on this is white trash. This one. So it's going to be a very popular thing here in the US, we believe. So we'll see. But you can see there are so much things out there. So the plant hunting today is actually to find the better ones that are in cultivation. So in order to introduce rare or untraditional species, it's important to find good-looking types, because some of the types which are available when you go to the Kew Garden or to Arnold Arboretum, Morris Arboretum, some of them are the worst types. There's still much out there. Just go through it. Albocinensis, this is a type you buy in the nursery in Holland. This is how it looks in the wild. See the difference? Which one do you want to buy? Tila tomentosa, this is how the species looks in cultivation. Good tree, but look how it grows here. It's impossible to prune or do something with. Even this one, this is from the plantation here, sterling silver. It's a good looking tree, narrow tree crown, but look how it looks inside. This is a good tree for street environments, but it's impossible to have in street environment because you have to higher up the tree crown in order to get buses or cars underneath. So what we did this spring, we went down to Iași in northeast Romania. I don't know if you read Russian poems. You do that? You should. It's good stuff. Iași is famous for its silver linden, sorry. Because if you read Russian poems, they write beautiful things of Iași, and its beautiful avenues with silver linden and so on. Yeah, that's famous for. So what we did actually, we went down there for 3 days to do the smash and grab to find some trees of silver limes that grows more as we want them as urban trees. So what we find is this one. We have a central leader, good tree architecture in a tree crown. This is another type, and this is another. So this is the thing we do a lot of hunting to find better types of trees that could, in order to find better types, they could be more useful and start to be a good complement to the traditional plant materials that we have. And actually, that was just a short introduction what we're doing. And what we're doing now here in Cornell is actually another project, which is as a complement to this, actually to learn more about how tolerable different species are. We have a project we call Shut the Hell Up or Die, which actually is what it's all about, trying to mapping how much a tree can shut the hell up when it comes to dry environment, or which trees that can't shut the hell up or die really early. Because in Sweden, there are too many landscape architects that want to have magnolias in paved environment as a street tree. But we have to show that no, magnolia is not the good tree. So what we're doing now, we try to read the turgor loss point of trees in order to see how much drought they can take before the cell structure in the leaves actually destroys. And magnolias destroys very early, which shows for the landscape planners and landscape architects they are not useful for paved environment. On the other hand, there are other species, for example, Eucommia or many oaks, but also some of the maples, which have a very, very high or low turgor loss point. Very low turgor loss point. You can take very, very high drought without get damage in the leaves, and it shows that these trees are better suited for urban pave sites. So that's what we're doing now. So what we actually, a general thing is try to find pieces in the puzzle to show that this species is better than that one. And in that case, we can start to argue that changing from the traditional plant material to a more untraditional. And this work is not only to tree planters, but also towards nursery in order to start to produce these untraditional tree materials. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ginkgos grow in Sweden?
Yeah, ginkgo goes very well.
Yeah.
And ginkgo have started to be these rare plants from Arboretum to become more and more planted. And that's part of the work we have done to show that this is better, for example, than lime trees or lignin trees. So, yeah, sure.
Were you successful in transferring genetic material from China? You were talking about Magnolia.
Yeah.
And if you did, how complicated the process
I
was?
swallowed the seeds. It's all fast now. The thing is, it's not possible to go there and just collect. You have to have a collaboration together with university. So they have a very good collaboration together with university. I think it's Northwest University of Agriculture and Forestry in China. Together, but we do it as a researcher. We don't do it as a commercial. So what we need is that we can collect as a scientist. It's possible for me to collect, plant it in my research field and see how it grows, because in our research we have 4 hectares of plantings and of Chinese materials that we're testing. But in order to commercialize it, we have to go back to China to get a contract with them. But it's impossible. It's waste of time to get a contract before you know how it will develop as an urban tree. So it's better to collect it as a scientist, because as a scientist, I stand above some of the laws. It's okay for me to do it, but in order to commercialize it, I have to have permits from China. But then you can go afterwards, and it's possible to get afterwards to get the right paper in order to commercialize some of the trees that we collect. So that's how it works. The US is a good country because you never sign anything. So it's very easy for me to come here and collect. And Eastern Europe belongs now to the European Union, so that's even more easier. But China is complicated to collect. You have to have collaboration with a botanic garden or a university, otherwise it's more or less impossible.
I think we can take one more question from Ken, and then I think we're out of time.
How many years do you have to grow these typical trees before you can really evaluate them?
Yeah. Well, the first collection we did was 2003, when I was just a research assistant. I had this boring job to take my backpack and go to China and collect for the professor. That was my first job as a research assistant. But already 2003, that's 10 years now, or over 10 years. We already start to propagate some of the materials from that in order to test them, how good they can be propagated. So you can see almost after 4 to 7 years, you see the potential of some of the plant materials. So then you can propagate them, and then we plant them on more places in Sweden in order to evaluate the hardiness and so on. So it doesn't have to take 60 or 70 or 100 years before you see. Some of the plant material collected with Nina here, for example, some of the maples, but also some of the oaks, we can already see today after 5 or 6 years, they grow so well, have been taking such a good, had grown so good during some of the coldest winter we have for 50 years in Sweden. So they are so interesting, so we're gonna start to propagate already now after over 6 or 7 years, because they have a good crown hierarchy with a central gene and everything. So but some of the trees shows their potential much later. Some of them shows early, some later. So it's different. It's a good answer, right?
Yes, there it is.
All right.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.